Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. For this presentation, we're going to look at the history of the mask and what other real reasons there may be to have the world wearing these things. From an April 2015 article from Medical Express entitled "Cloth Masks Dangerous to Your Health." Reading from the article, the widespread use of cloth masks by healthcare workers may actually put them at increased risk of respiratory illness and viral infections, and their global use should be discouraged, according to a UNSW study, and that's University of New South Wales. The results of the first randomized clinical trial to study the efficacy of cloth masks were published today in the journal BMG Open. The trial saw 1,607 hospital healthcare workers across 14 hospitals in the Vietnamese capital, Hanoi, split into three groups: those wearing medical masks, those wearing cloth masks, and a control group based on usual practice, which included mask wearing. Workers used the mask on every shift for 4 consecutive weeks. The study found respiratory infection was much higher among healthcare workers wearing cloth masks. The penetration of cloth masks by particles was almost 97%, compared to the medical masks with 44%. Professor Raina McIntyre, lead study author and head of UNSW's School of Public Health and Community Medicine, said the results of the study cautioned against the use of cloth masks. Cloth masks should not be used by workers in any healthcare setting, but particularly high-risk situations such as emergency departments, intensive care, pediatric, or respiratory wards. Cloth masks remain widely used globally because they are a cheaper option, especially in areas where there are shortages of protective equipment, including in Asian countries, which have historically been affected by emerging infectious diseases, as well in West Africa, which was the epicenter of the recent Ebola epidemic a few years ago. The authors speculate that the cloth mask's moisture retention, their reuse, and poor filtration may explain the increased risk of infection. Professor McIntyre, who has completed the largest body of clinical trial research on respiratory protection in health workers internationally, said emerging infectious diseases are not constrained within geographical borders. Effective controls of outbreaks and pandemics at the origins impacts us directly, so it is important for global disease control that the use of cloth masks be discouraged in high-risk situations, she said. Despite more than half the world using cloth masks, global disease control guidelines, including those from the World Health Organization, and we know all about them, fail to clearly specify conditions of their use. These guidelines need to be updated to reflect the higher infectious risk posed by cloth masks, as found in our study, she said. Professor McIntyre said the study's results pointed to the effectiveness of medical masks in addition to the harm caused by cloth masks. So these masks don't even help. And in fact, they seem to create an even more dangerous situation for the donor. So why force us to wear one? Let's start by looking at the history of masks in general. The history of masks goes back to the masquerade ball. Historians argue that masks were being used by individual Venetians as far back as 726 AD. And I'd like to point out that Venice is in Italy and is near Rome, and 726 AD is a few hundred years after Constantine morphed the mystery school sun-worshipping religions and Christianity. And my point is that, once again, you can bet who is behind all of this. And in fact, here are some leaked pics from a masquerade ball held by the Rothschilds at one of their mansions in the early 1970s. Here's a mask with somebody's wearing with horns that seems eerily similar to Baphomet. A masquerade ball is a party of hidden identities. The objective of it is to have everyone's identity hidden behind fancy and elaborate masks. In the 15th century, masquerade balls were social gatherings such as decadent pageants, marriage proceedings, lavish evening parties, eating and drinking parties. The members of the upper class and elite of the medieval era used masks as costumes to disguise as they partied at pageants and public gatherings. Venetian masks served as coverage for the members of the medieval court and gave them the freedom to be someone else without being watched. These events are usually held with dances and great fanfare in Venice, Italy, where masquerade ball is a culture. When the Venetian Republic ended, the notoriety of the tradition declined. In 1900, the masquerade tradition became popular again in Europe. But why were the masks themselves worn? Well, masquerade masks were worn by the elite at balls to hide their identities and express freedom of speech and opinion without recognition. There were black masks and white masks with designs and patterns over a chosen base. The major types of masks used were masks with sticks that were held up just in front of the face, and full face masks, half face masks, and then head masks. With a mask on, you could do or say anything in anonymity and without judgment. The upper class and elite of Venice couldn't do anything shady, even in the dark, without being judged by someone who knows them. The lower class of Venice also realized they could mingle with the higher class without shame. Everyone was about hiding their identity to enjoy without worrying about any backlash or discrimination. Masquerades and masked balls are linked to the celebration of Carnival and Mardi Gras. Originally part of a cycle of pagan festivities celebrating the advent of the spring planting season, in the Middle Ages, Carnival began after the winter solstice as part of the Feast of Fools, for which the congregation elected abbots and bishops from among the junior clergy, who masked and dressed in women's clothes, and performed a mock mass that ended with dancing in the church and streets, and the coronation of an abbot of misrule, as they called him. With the Reformation, Protestant countries banned Carnival, while the Feast of Fools moved into the streets. The result was that in Catholic countries, carnival revelry and masking took over the streets of towns and countries between Twelfth Night and Ash Wednesday, in anticipation of giving up all meat and sex for Lent. We should point out here that this forced mask wearing today began almost exactly when Lent began, in mid-March. Carnival thrived in Paris, Venice, and Rome, among other cities. The last 6 days of Carnival were called Fat Days, lasting from the Thursday before Ash Wednesday through the night of Mardi Gras. These were celebrated with masked balls, obscene dancing, eating, drinking, and sex. On the morning of Ash Wednesday, this orgiastic explosion ended in a parade of exhausted masked revelers. Now let's go back to the Festival of Fools that we just spoke about a few seconds ago. In this world turned upside down, women dressed as men, frequently as soldiers, sailors, men as women. The poor disguised themselves as bishops, lawyers, and aristocrats, and the rich disguised themselves as beggars, peasants, fishmongers. In Oriental masquerade and in domino, the classic Venetian costume of a hooded black cape and mask. Regardless of a person's gender and class, Sexual license was tolerated at mass balls so that men and women were free to indulge their sexual provocations with persons of whatever sex and class they chose. With the French Revolution, Carnival and masking were temporarily banned, while in England such permissiveness died. Festival of Fools, again, is described as a world turned upside down, where women dressed as men and men dressed like women. If you've seen the video on this channel entitled A Luciferian World, this description of the festival will immediately ring some bells. An important part of any individual's life is their identity. Whether you are sure of it or not, the exclusivity is what makes it sacred. The possibility of another exposing your identity, making you vulnerable in some way, is a terrifying thought, and thus the need to conceal identities has been seen to be as notable a phenomenon as the development of identity itself. The practice of identity concealment can be seen throughout history, from prehistoric cave paintings depicting animal masks to our 21st century social networking profiles and avatars. The need to hide oneself for whatever reasons seems to be present throughout time, and in this case, the need is being forced upon the people. It should be noted these artful masks were not used for debauchery alone. They were also employed in more violent activities. A competition known as the War of the Fists saw teams of men violently assaulting each other whilst wearing masks as a form of disguise. This bloody competition was banned in 1705 when fists were replaced with knives. It's almost as though psychologically humans are more apt to participate in immoral, unethical, dangerous, and even illegal behavior when they are wearing a mask. Carnival is derived from the Latin carne vel, meaning farewell to meat. However, the idea of dressing up for spring stems from the festival of Isis Caris Navalis, roughly translated as navel cart. Ancient Egyptians would carry images of the goddess Isis out to sea to bless the first sailors setting off after winter. This march was accompanied by a parade of people dressed like animals and other sacred costumes. So, in summary, it's used for disguising in order to participate in any carnal pleasures one desires. And again, please see the video on this channel entitled A Luciferian World. They were used by wealthy and the affluent for disguising and to get liberated from their own personality traits in the parties. It was a medium to evade the glaring social eyes due to the stigma attached with wealthy socials. Socializing with the commoners at a party was looked down upon. In the era of Italian Renaissance, the festivities marked a touch of elegancy, luxuriance, and regality. The masquerade masks were used in social balls, grand parties, and festive celebrations. But the real disguise was that at the backdrop of these parties, all kinds of human emotions and characters were being displayed and enacted. These included secret or illegal financial interactions, undue sexual favors, and anonymous transactions. Let's talk a little bit about the symbolism of a mask now. A mask is an ancient form of an expressive facial disguise. It was used to frighten enemies and contain identity. In modern day, the mask is generally known to be a symbol of the concealment of the ego behind an artificial mask. Up to this point in this presentation, we've gone over all of the establishment-provided history and psychology of the mask. Now, with a little bit more work and discernment with regard to finding proper sources, I'd now like to read to you an article written by Paul Wingert from Encyclopedia Britannica. Mask. A form of disguise or concealment usually worn over or in front of the face to hide the identity of a person and, by its own features, to establish another being. This essential characteristic of hiding and revealing personalities or mood is common to all masks. As cultural objects, they have been used throughout the world in all periods since the Stone Age, and have been as varied in appearance as in their use in symbolism. In some instances, the mask form is a replication of natural features or is quite realistic, and in other instances, it is an abstraction. Masks usually represent supernatural beings, ancestors, and fanciful or imagined figures. And they can also be portraits. The localization of a particular spirit in a specific mask must be considered a highly significant reason for its existence. In masks worn for socially significant rituals, the change in identity of the wearer for that of the mask is vital. For if the spirit represented does not reside in the image of the mask, the ritual petitions, supplications, and offerings made to it would be ineffectual and meaningless. The mask, therefore, most often functions as a means of contact with various spiritual powers, thereby protecting against the unknown forces of the universe. A primary belief involved in both the conception and the rendering of these masks was and is that all organic and inorganic matter contains spiritual power, and that the mask itself therefore possesses the power of whatever material was used to make it. This power is considered a volatile, active force that is surrounded by various taboos and restrictions for the protection of those handling it. In the example of ceremonial masks, certain prescribed rituals must be followed in the process of the mask's creation. In most instances, the artist's tools too contain spiritual power, and even these must be handled in a prescribed manner. As the form of the mask develops, it is usually believed to acquire power increasingly in its own right. And again, various procedures are prescribed to protect the craftsman and to ensure the potency of the object. If all the conventions have been adhered to, the completed mask, when worn or displayed, is regarded as an object sufficed with great supernatural and spirit power. In some cultures, it is believed that because of the close association between the mask maker and the spirit of the mask, the artist absorbs some of its magic power. A few West African peoples believe, in fact, that the creators of masks are potentially capable of using the object's supernatural powers to cause harm to others. The person who wears the mask is also considered to be in direct association with the mask's spirit force. For the sake of protection, the wearer, like the mask maker, is required to follow certain sanctioned procedures in using the mask. The real drama and power of its form is the important contribution of the wearer. Covered by the mask and costume, the performer loses his previous identity and assumes a new one. Upon donning the mask, the wearer sometimes undergoes a psychic change and, as in a trance, assumes the spirit character depicted by the mask. Usually, however, the wearer skillfully becomes a partner of the character he is impersonating, giving to the mask not only an important spark of vitality by the light flashing from his own eyes, but also bringing it alive by his movements and poses. But often the wearer seems to become psychologically one with the character he is helping to create. He seems to become a robot without his own will, which has become subservient to that of the personage of the mask. At all times there remains some important, if not sub rosa, association between the mask and its wearer. For ceremonies at which masks are worn, they are viewed by both spectators and participants as consecrated objects imbued with supernatural power. Whatever their specific identity may be, the masks usually refer to early times when their initial appearance occurred. This basic aspect of the mask is to give a sense of continuity between the present and the beginnings of time, a sense that is of vital importance for the integration of a culture with no written history. The mask has a spirit content that is respected and revered, even if it does not depict a being with malignant potential. All of these forms have spirit and magical qualities and are thus esteemed as agents for the accomplishing of superhuman acts. Some masks, however, do represent malignant, evil, or potentially harmful spirits. These are often used to keep a required balance of power or a traditional social and political relationship of inherited positions within a culture. The characters depicted are also prescribed by traditions and enact roles to achieve the desired ends. The drama involving these masks is often associated with secret societies, especially in Africa, where the greatest range of masks, forms, and functions can be observed. These forms are often used in restricted performances, where only select persons can view them. Restricted observation is also found in other cultures. On the basis of present knowledge, it would appear that there is not or has not been any set response or reaction by any one of the three groups involved with the mask: the artist, the wearer, and the spectator. There is, however, a reaction of a particular kind common to every culture, a response such as awe, delight and pleasure, fear and even terror. These are as traditionally determined as the forms and costumes of the masks themselves. This is a learned and inherent pattern of conduct for each culture. As indicated earlier, masks representing potentially harmful spirits were often used to keep a required balance of power or a traditional relationship of inherited positions within a culture. The forms of these masks invariably were prescribed by tradition, as were their uses. Masks have served an important role as a means of discipline and have been used to admonish. Common in China, Africa, Oceania, and North America, admonitory masks usually completely cover the features of the wearer. Some African peoples hold that the first mask to be used was an admonitory one. In one version of the mask origin, a child, repeatedly told not to, persisted in following its mother to fetch water. To frighten and discipline the child, the mother painted a hideous face on the bottom of her water gourd. Another version is that the mask was invented by a secret society to escape recognition while punishing marauders. In New Britain, an island of Papua New Guinea, members of a secret terrorist society called the Duk Duk appear in monstrous 5-foot masks to police, to judge, and to execute offenders. Aggressive supernatural spirits of an almost demonic nature were represented by these masks, which were constructed from a variety of materials. Rituals, often nocturnal, by members of secret societies wearing ancestor masks were reminders of the ancient sanctions of their code. In many cultures, these masks ceremonies were intended to prevent miscreant acts and to maintain the circumscribed activities of the group. Along the Guinea coast of West Africa, for instance, many highly realistic masks represent ancestors who enjoyed specific cultural roles. The masks symbolize sanction and control when donned by the wearer. Folks, please watch some of the Mystery Babylon series from this channel, because this is all connected. And I know the background music is distracting, but soon I'll re-upload them without any music. That information is key to all of this. Masks have long been used in military connections. A war mask will have a malevolent expression or hideously fantastic feature to instill fear in the enemy. The ancient Greeks and Romans used battle shields with grotesque masks, such as gorgon masks, or attached terrifying masks to their armor, as did Chinese warriors. Grimacing or half masks, generally covering the face below the eyes, were used by Japanese samurai. Here is a March 2014 article from the New Republic that shows that wearing masks make people more likely to violate rules or social norms. In the past few decades, social scientists have contributed empirical data showing that masks make people more likely to violate rules or norms. In 1979, Purdue University psychologists Franklin Miller and Kathleen Rowold looked at how putting on a mask affected the chance of children breaking rules by tracking the behavior of 58 kids on Halloween, some of whom wore masks as part of their costumes. The children were offered a bowl of candy and told they could take 2 pieces, and as they expected, the kids in masks were way more likely to take more candy than they were supposed to. 62% of the children in masks broke the 2 candy limit, compared to 37% of those whose faces were visible. In an experiment in 1976, Eugene Mathis and Thomas Guest, psychologists at Western Illinois University, explored how wearing a mask would affect college students' willingness to walk around their campus cafeteria carrying a banner reading, "Masturbation is fun." Some students were told that they could wear a ski mask that would cover their entire head except their eyes, while others weren't given that option. Unsurprisingly, the ones who were allowed to wear a ski mask were willing to carry the sign for much less money, $29.98 on average, versus $47.92 for the unmasked. And this makes a good segue, ladies and gentlemen, into masks and horror movies. In many films, often the face of evil isn't a face at all, it's a mask. The most popular villains and killers in movies have masks on. Leatherface, the giant crazed butcher in the Texas Chainsaw Massacre series, wears a mask made of human skin. Michael Myers, the slasher from the Halloween franchise, wears a mask based on William Shatner's face. In the gory torture porn series Saw, the killer Jigsaw often wears a grotesque clown-like mask. Don't forget about Scream. That guy wears a mask. While the mask as character device is most common in horror films, it appears in other dramatic genres, including science fiction, like Star Wars with Darth Vader. Most all of this info on mask wearing can be summarized as that no matter the supposed purpose or occasion for wearing the mask, it seems to separate one from their normal, previously established personality traits. And without making this impression in this presentation too long, this will cause a serious psychological disorder called DID, or dissociated identity disorder. Dissociative identity disorder is a severe form of disassociation, a mental process which produces a lack of connection in a person's thoughts, memories, feelings, actions, or sense of identity. Dissociative identity disorder is thought to stem from a combination of factors that may include trauma experienced by the person with the disorder. The dissociative aspect is thought to be a coping mechanism. The person literally shuts off or disassociates himself or herself from a situation or experience that's too violent, traumatic, or painful to assimilate with his conscious self. I think it should be pointed out here that there are many other factors being forced upon you from these satanic controllers. Not only will the mask possibly force DID upon you, there are other factors that will assist with this too, like, for instance, social media. which causes a horrible case of insecurity to those too far into it. Everything posted on one's social media is staged to be perfect, or as perfect as one can make it. Staging the scenery around a picture, for instance, or using camera filters to make a pic seem flawless or prettier, like one's face. On Facebook, for instance, folks post their new vehicle or new house or some home improvement or other material item, causing those seeing this to covet these items too. And even if they can't get those things, they will become quite sad and insecure, and not realizing that it's all staged and fake. They could go into a depression-like state, and it's been documented to have happened. All of this, along with long-term use of this mask, will make the possibility of acquiring DID even more likely. We know that we are dealing with a cult, ladies and gentlemen. Some ancient, perverted death cult of some kind, preserved, maintained, and brought to us by the mystery schools. A publication for the last 30 years called Cult Watch defines the modern-day cult. It says, the modern definition of a mind control cult is any group which employs mind control and deceptive recruiting techniques. In other words, cults trick people into joining and coerce them into staying. This is the definition that most people would agree with. Except the cults themselves, of course. They further cite 4 types of cults: religious, commercial, self-help or counseling, and political. And I'll say that this cult today that is in charge of things is primarily a political cult. However, it is very, very sophisticated, and this sophistication is because this cult blends a combination of all these 4 types of cults into one. Cults primarily use mind control on their members, and Cult Watch has broken this down into different categories, and I'd like to go over a couple of them with you briefly. The main mind control technique is deception. This is to say that the cult must lie to you in order to get you to join, and this is obvious as most folks are reasonable people for the most part. Now, I don't want to get into the left-right false paradigm, but I'd like to point out here that this explains the D party as a whole, but I wouldn't be fully truthful if I didn't point out that a large portion of the R party is the same, however, not as bad as the Ds. The Democrats push anti-American ideals. They put America last while giving away the farm to even non-Americans. The only way to push these types of counterintuitive, self-detrimental policies upon the population is to trick them using certain mind control techniques, one being deception. Another method used is fear and intimidation, guilt, character assassination. Guilt will be used to control you. Maybe the reason you're not making money is because you're not, quote unquote, with the program. Maybe the reason you're not able to convert new recruits is because, quote, your heart is prideful and full of sin. It could never be that the program isn't working or those new recruits have valid reasons for not joining. It's always your fault. You're always wrong, and so you must try harder. You will also be made to feel very guilty for disobeying any of the cult's written or unwritten rules. Character assassination is used to help create the guilt in you. Character assassination is a type of false reasoning used by people in groups who have no real arguments. And we've seen this used against Donald Trump and his followers. Racist, sexist. No real arguments, ideas, or positions, just frivolous accusations intended to pull on your heartstrings and play on your inherent goodness and use it against you. The technical name for character assassination is the ad hominem fallacy. Another mind control method that many out there know about is called reporting structure, or simply put, snitching. In a mind control cult like in Nazi Germany or in communist Russia, you must be careful of what you say and do. The walls have ears, as they say. Everyone is encouraged to watch out for struggling brothers and sisters and report what they see to leadership. Now we see this happening as we speak, with people from all over the country snitching on other people who aren't wearing their masks. It's disgusting. Another method is info control. Those who control the information control the person. In a mind control cult, any information from outside the cult is considered evil, especially if it is opposing the cult. Members are told not to read it or believe it. Only information supplied by the cult is true. One cult labels any information against it as persecution or spiritual pornography. Another cult calls it apostate literature and will expel you from the group if you are caught with it. Cults train their members to instantly destroy any critical information given to them, and to not even entertain the thought that the information could be true. Sound familiar to any of you out there? Here's an article by none other than the CIA's very own CNN, entitled "Seductive Power of Uniforms and Cult Dress Codes." History has long shown that if you want to get people to behave as you want, a uniform can go a long way. A uniform is usually a clean slate, a starting point, said Alex Esculapio, a writer and PhD candidate with a focus on fashion and sociology. It shows you're not alone and you belong to a group of people. It becomes your new identity and really signals a new start. Whether it's cults, terrorist groups, or paramilitary organizations, violent fringe factions often like to create a recognizable visual identity. Right-wing demigod Oswald Mosley and Mussolini used drab colors like black and brown to create an image of militaristic strength, while Marxist groups seem to favor berets and fatigues. At protests around the world, you can find the instantly recognizable hoodies of the anti-fascist Black Bloc group, or the Antifas too. Religious cults might be more spiritual than political, but they clearly understand the power of uniform. The thing that all cults, religions, or any social groups looking to distinguish themselves from mainstream cultures have in common is a uniform that really sets them apart and makes all the members look alike. It creates a group identity, which is a signal to outsiders, said Esculapio. They're similar to an organized religion who often have specific uniforms, such as Buddhist monks or Catholic priests. And there's also an overlap with the fashion mentality in general, the idea of style tribes. I think it's a dynamic that is present in all social life, but it becomes heightened in the case of cults. Perhaps the best known example of this practice is the most violent and notorious cult of all, the so-called Manson family. In their early days at Spahn Ranch, Charles Manson cultivated a carefree, almost pastoral look for his family. The girls grew their hair long and uncombed, wore floral dresses, and walked in bare feet. They could almost have been mistaken for a church group on an outing. But after a series of brutal killings and a guilty verdict, Charles Manson shaved his head and his remaining supporters followed suit, creating a peculiar pseudo-Eastern look. Manson was using aesthetic to both lure people in and to push them away. He created a pastoral, utopian, and popular at the time, hippie version of his followers for when they needed to attract lost souls and runaways, and then turn them into violent, freakish nightmare version for when they were put on a world stage. Another infamous American cult who used uniform and stylistic language to create a feeling of purpose and vision was the suicide sect Heaven's Gate. The group shot to worldwide attention in 1997 when 39 members, including group leader Marshall Applewhite, took a lethal dose of poison and vodka before laying down to die in adjoining bunk beds. But the most striking element of the photos splashed across the media at the time was that every member was wearing the same pair of Nike Decade trainers and black jogging pants. Don't think the cabal crowd, the Illuminati controllers, are a cult and they want you in it? I suggest you take the time to rethink your position. An article from abuseandrelationships.org entitled Cults and Abuse points out this about cults. Cults have systematic traits that weaken all common members, cognitive and self-protective functions. These traits have been in evidence in diverse groups, such as Stalin's Soviet Union, multi-level marketing schemes, some religious sects, utopian and intentional communities, some nonprofits, and some psychotherapy movements. No belief, simple, profound, or bizarre by itself, is able to keep a large number of people cohesively together through abusive experiences. Rather, such communities misuse normal attachment behavior. With rare exception, people feel insecure because they do not feel unconditionally acceptable. This leads to trying to find and fulfill the conditions of achieving unconditional acceptance. This goes to what I was speaking about with dissociative identity disorder and how social media causes people to feel insecure or not accepted. Abusive communities promise unconditional acceptance, often in the form of realizing some perfective state or afterlife outcome in which one is so manifestly good one cannot be rejected. Then, life in that community becomes one condition after another. Members are often led to believe that they have unconditional acceptance and that what is asked is to be an expression of gratitude, but the truth comes out when they fail or they try to decline. Also, cults falsely promise certainty and perfectibility. Neither actually exists in this world. However, it is very human to seek them, with perhaps greater fervor if one has had earlier relationship trauma, which is immensely common in this Luciferian world we live in. It is a myth that members of an abusive community are mentally or emotionally troubled upon joining. Actually, such individuals are usually rejected because their sensitivity would lead them to exhibit distress publicly from their maltreatment. What is wanted are individuals that are able to hide their suffering from themselves and others. The first threshold of abuse in communities seems to be the disallowance of any balance point between the needs of the group and the needs of the individual. This is not to say the individual is encouraged to prioritize the group needs way above his or her own, but rather it is to not allow to even think in these terms. That is, the self doesn't exist. This is the ultimate negation of the self. This is loss of autonomy, loss of identity. This sets the stage for the exploitation of members. The second threshold of abuse is blind obedience. Doing whatever the leadership asks is either held as the highest virtue or the strongest sign of virtue. It is unquestioning obedience. It is not fidelity to a principle or a cause, but to a person. Humans generally find it easier to be loyal to a person than to an idea. This is attachment behavior. Abusive communities always identify compliance or surrender as the greatest good. Obedience becomes a powerful tool for manipulation because anything, even harmful acts or acts contrary to their beliefs, can be made good by making them the subject of obedience to the leadership. This is how people trying to be good can be made to do bad things. This describes the sheeple to a T, ladies and gentlemen. This is loss of integrity. This sets the stage for the exploitation of others by the members. Here's some other elements of cult control, and please pay attention to these folks. They usually have a special leader. The rightness of the community is believed to reside not in set beliefs, not in long established practices, not in durable principles, but in the guidance of the present leadership, which is the only source of truth. Because of this, ideology and rules may change quickly or even reverse. This is a setup for manipulation. Boy, were we had, huh, folks? They have a doctrine of depravity. This is the belief that members' instincts, desires, tendencies, feelings, and inclinations can't be trusted. If these things agree with the leadership, fine. But if they do not, it is evidence of just how much the member needs the community. By definition, any assertion of self-interest becomes wrong, and any boundary, which is a product of self-interest, is also wrong. They pander to dependency or needs. Every adult has a residual desire to be taken care of by strong and wise parents, but this cannot work for adults. Abusive communities offer, usually unconsciously, the illusion of unconditional parental control and care by using paternalistic metaphors and protecting members from adult decisions. Dependency that is indulged in this way grows in the members over time, making leaving even more unthinkable. Many daily routines in abusive communities, while exhausting, have a preschool quality to them. It's eerie reading all of this aloud, folks. Very, very eerie to me. Communal living is another aspect. This limits or eliminates non-believing influences, eliminates privacy, and prevents cognitive regrouping. It is essential for control. It also severs prior relationships with neighborhoods or settings. Leaving is taboo. Whatever the ideology, it always includes a doctrine that membership must be lifelong, because there is no such thing as trying it out for a while. Critical thinking and considerations of whether the experience is agreeable go out the window. It also blocks the natural human response to maltreatment, which is to leave. It devalues the outsider, and this has many functions. Number one, it isolates members from opposing ideas. Sound familiar? Number two, it isolates members from sources of attachment that would compete with the leader or community. Number three, it mobilizes the survival drive in members, which is channeled into cult activities. Number four, it justifies deceptive practices. And number five, it provides a target to safely displace anger at oppressive conditions. This is why it seems nowadays that if you are saying something to that someone doesn't like to hear or doesn't agree with, they shout you down, they drown you out, and in some cases they silence you. They want to raise children in common. This is to weaken parent-child bonds, which, like romantic and sexual relationships, would divide loyalties. Children are indoctrinated into beliefs. That is, neither critical thinking nor comparison is not allowed. The leader may keep all parental authority to her or himself, because children tend to be natural truth tellers. There is a rush to get children to adopt an approved adult perspective and not just be kids. Ladders. Everyone is comforted by evidence that he or she is getting somewhere. But in adult life, there are very few concrete systems that provide that. Abusive communities both provide different positions of status to be attained and a closed group in which the status is uniformly recognized. Compliance is either covertly or openly the criteria for promotion, and so an unquestioning attitude is given incentive. It goes without saying that all progress on the ladder can be lost for dissent or for leaving. Secrecy. Key parts of what happens in the group are kept secret, certainly from the outside, but also from large portions of the membership. Often what is kept secret are practices or beliefs that actually contradict the more benign information that is used for recruitment. They have a security force. This is not always present, but when it is used to eliminate dissent. It is justified on the basis of security and protection of the members. And this is the future of all law enforcement in the world if the Satan worshippers get their way, folks. Security always rationalizes and disguises loss of freedom. This force is always somewhat privileged, which creates a feeling of being an insider, which intensifies loyalty and obedience for these force members. These members can be trusted with secrets because secrecy seems justified to security personnel. Sometimes the security force is called a crisis or mental health force. Oh yes, ladies and gentlemen. And these are coming to a clinic in your town too, if we don't win this. Dissent labeled as mental illness. The Soviet Union is famous for locking dissidents up in mental hospitals. And some mid-level Sanders staffer called this re-education camps. In their own words, claiming the future need to potentially lock Trump supporters up in these camps for re-education and mind rehabilitation. Other abusive communities may not have locked hospitals at their disposal, but labeling a dissident as crazy is still effective at undermining the dissenting message and creating fear of thinking in unorthodox ways. I'll say this again, by labeling a dissident as crazy is effective at undermining the dissenting message. Crazy or conspiracy theorist, straight from the CIA. The Emperor's Clothes. This is a familiar tactic of manipulation where it is suggested that something very fine is happening when in fact nothing is happening. To make it work further, it is suggested that only the refined can appreciate what is happening. Very quickly, an insecure group member will say and often believe that he or she actually sees it happening. This starts a chain reaction in which almost everyone goes along, or at least keeps silent. Compartmentalization. This is a common tactic used by the cabal in all areas of their influence because it works very well. As the bond of the member to the group becomes stronger and stronger, he or she is incrementally allowed to know secrets. The cognitive and moral dissonance is counterbalanced with feeling special and time invested. This is really a form of grooming. Also, no one is allowed to know everything that is going on. This keeps members divided and confused. Involuntary transgressions or thought crimes. Thoughts, desires, and doubts that deviate from the approved agenda are stigmatized as betrayals. Since everyone has these, whether they want them or not, this has the effect of keeping everyone feeling guilty. It also keeps conversations superficial because no one wants to share what they are really thinking. Oh boy, this is scary stuff, folks. Constant guilt. It is hinted, if not plainly stated, that members are not doing enough or are doing wrong things. This keeps any of them from feeling the standing to question or oppose anything. And of course, this technique was used to force mass immigration upon the nations of the world over the last, 2014 to 2016. Altered states. These are states of mind that are discontinuous with the one's usual state of mind. And many of these, I have a feeling, are being forced upon us without us even knowing it, in order to create these altered states within us. Examples are from meditation and chanting, or I'll compare this to many of us going around chanting and singing their songs, whether in our heads or out loud. Hyperventilation, hypnosis, or I'll say TV commercials. Prayer, fasting, or eating some of their lab-made foods might make you fast and you don't even know it. Sensory deprivation, like being bombarded by negativity through movie, TV, and news. Or sleep deprivation, which is forced upon us through stress and lab-made food diets. According to this publication, all these methods, in modest doses, can have a role in personal growth, and almost all of these methods can be affected by the controllers without us even knowing it. Ladies and gentlemen, I suggest you re-listen to these common cult principles, and I'd like you to think of them as you're analyzing those in control and their methods and the things that they've been attempting to force upon us. And then re-listen to it again, folks. Masks to eliminate your identity, to make you part of the collective. Sometimes they're evil, sometimes they're magic, but most of the time they're a symbol. It seems that there's much more to these masks than meets the eye, ladies and gentlemen. If you enjoyed this presentation, please like, share, and subscribe. Thank you for watching.